The dust swirled around Elena Martinez's boots as she walked through the center of Cedar Falls, her chin held high despite the whispers that followed her like shadows. The morning sun cast long lines across the wooden boardwalks, and already the town was buzzing with gossip about what had happened the night before at the Whitman Ranch. Elena had always been different from the other young women in Cedar Falls. While they spent their days learning to embroider and discussing which young man might ask for their hand in marriage, Elena worked alongside her father in his blacksmith shop. Her hands were strong from handling iron and steel, her arms toned from swinging hammers. She could shoe a horse better than most men and fix a broken wagon wheel faster than anyone in 3 counties. At 22, she was considered an old maid by the standards of their small Texas town. Most women her age had been married for years and already had children clinging to their skirts, but Elena had refused every suitor who came calling. She had dreams that reached beyond the confines of marriage and motherhood. She wanted to see the world beyond Cedar Falls, to maybe start her own business, to live life on her own terms. The Whitman family owned the largest cattle ranch in the county, and their eldest son, Richard Whitman, was considered the most eligible bachelor for miles around. He was handsome in a conventional way, with blonde hair that he kept perfectly combed and blue eyes that many women found charming. He dressed in expensive clothes ordered from back east and never seemed to have a speck of dirt under his fingernails. His family had money, land, and influence. Any woman would be lucky to marry him, according to the town gossips. Richard had been pursuing Elena for over a year, sending flowers, calling at her father's shop, and making it clear to everyone in town that he intended to make her his wife. Elena had been polite, but firm in her rejections. She simply was not interested in Richard Whitman or the life he offered. Last night, things had come to a head. Richard had organized what he called a social gathering at his family's ranch, but everyone knew it was really an elaborate marriage proposal. Half the town had been invited to witness what Richard assumed would be Elena's acceptance of his hand in marriage. He had spared no expense, hiring musicians from San Antonio, ordering special food, and even having fireworks shipped in for the occasion. Elena's father, Miguel Martinez, had urged her to attend. "Mija," he had said in his gentle voice, "Richard is a good man from a good family. He can give you security, a fine house, everything a woman could want." But Elena knew what she wanted, and it was not Richard Whitman. Still, she had agreed to go to the gathering, hoping to end his pursuit once and for all in a clear, public way that would leave no room for misunderstanding. The evening had started well enough. Elena wore her best dress, a deep green cotton that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. Her long black hair was braided with small white flowers that her neighbor had picked from her garden. She looked beautiful, but there was a determination in her expression that should have warned Richard of what was to come. The other guests mingled in the large yard behind the Whitman house, drinking punch and eating cake while a string quartet played soft music. Elena spoke politely with the townspeople, deflecting their questions about her special evening with Richard. She could see him across the yard, accepting congratulations from men who assumed his proposal was just a formality. As the sun began to set, Richard called for everyone's attention. The crowd gathered in a large circle, and Elena found herself standing in the center with Richard facing her. He had planned every detail of this moment, right down to the way the setting sun would create a romantic backdrop behind them. Richard dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring that sparkled with diamonds. The crowd gasped and applauded, already celebrating before Elena had even spoken. Richard's voice carried across the yard as he began his rehearsed speech about their future together, their children, and the fine life they would build on his family's land. Elena let him finish. She owed him that much courtesy, but when he looked up at her expectantly, holding the ring toward her, she spoke clearly and firmly so that everyone could hear. "Richard, I appreciate the honor of your proposal, but my answer is no. I cannot marry you because I do not love you, and I do not wish to be a rancher's wife. I have different dreams for my life." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face turned red, then white. He remained on one knee for a moment, as if he could not believe what he had heard. The ring trembled in his hand. "Elena," he said, his voice tight with embarrassment. "Surely you don't mean that. Every woman wants security, a home, a family. I'm offering you the best of everything." "I mean exactly what I said," Elena replied. "I'm sure you will find a woman who wants those things, but I am not that woman." Richard stood slowly, his jaw clenched. The crowd began to murmur, and Elena could hear the word foolish whispered more than once. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, some shocked, some disapproving, some clearly angry on Richard's behalf. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, and the town's unofficial social leader stepped forward. "Elena Martinez, what is wrong with you? Richard Whitman is offering you everything a woman could want. You'll never get another chance like this." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," Elena said calmly. The murmurs grew louder. Elena could see her father standing at the edge of the crowd, his face filled with worry. He had warned her that refusing Richard publicly would have consequences, but she had hoped the townspeople would understand her right to choose her own path. Richard's mother, Margaret Whitman, pushed through the crowd. Her face was flushed with anger and humiliation. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed. "My son has shown you nothing but kindness and respect, and this is how you repay him? In front of the entire town?" "I have shown him respect by being honest," Elena said. "It would have been cruel to accept his proposal when I could never make him happy as his wife." "You think you're too good for our family?" Margaret continued, her voice rising. "Your father is a blacksmith, Elena. You work with your hands like a common laborer. My son could have lifted you up, given you a place in society, made you a lady." "I don't want to be lifted up," Elena said. "I'm proud of my work and my family." The crowd was growing more hostile by the minute. Elena could see that she had miscalculated badly. She had thought that being honest and direct would end the matter cleanly, but instead, she had humiliated one of the most powerful families in the county in front of everyone they knew. A voice from the crowd called out, "Who do you think you are, Elena Martinez? You're getting too old to be so picky." Another voice added, "Richard's too good for her anyway. Let her end up an old spinster." Elena felt her cheeks burning, but she kept her expression calm. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down. She looked at Richard, who was still standing there holding the ring. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I truly did not mean to embarrass you. I simply cannot marry someone I do not love." Richard's eyes were cold when he looked at her. "You'll regret this, Elena. You think you have choices, but you don't. This town won't forget what you've done here tonight." Elena turned and walked away from the crowd, her back straight and her step steady. But she could hear the angry voices behind her, and she knew that Richard's words were probably true. Cedar Falls was a small town with a long memory, especially when it came to slights against important families like the Whitmans. Now, walking through town the morning after, Elena was discovering just how right Richard had been. The stares and whispers followed her everywhere. When she stopped at the general store to buy supplies for her father's shop, the conversation stopped the moment she walked through the door. Mrs. Cooper, who had always been friendly before, turned away when Elena tried to greet her. The store owner, Mr. Johnson, was curt and unfriendly when she asked for the items on her list. Several other customers made pointed comments about women who don't know their place and foolish girls who think they're too good for decent men. At the post office, the clerk took his time serving the people ahead of her, even when new customers came in behind her. When it was finally her turn, he handed her the mail without making eye contact and turned away immediately. The worst part was seeing the satisfaction on some of the faces she passed. There were people in Cedar Falls who had always resented Elena for being different, for working in a man's trade, for refusing to conform to their expectations of what a woman should be. Now they felt vindicated in their disapproval. Elena tried to tell herself that she had done the right thing, that marrying Richard would have been unfair to both of them. But it was hard to maintain her confidence when it felt like the entire town had turned against her. When she reached her father's blacksmith shop, she found Miguel working at the forge, but his usual cheerful humming was absent. He looked up when she entered, his dark eyes filled with concern. "How was town, mija?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "About as expected," Elena said, hanging up her shawl and tying on her leather apron. "They'll get tired of talking about it eventually." Miguel set down his hammer and looked at his daughter seriously. "Elena, I respect your decision, but I'm worried about you. The Whitmans have influence in this county. Richard's father sits on the town council and has business dealings with almost every merchant in Cedar Falls. They could make life very difficult for us." Elena had been thinking the same thing, but she did not want to admit it. "Papa, we provide a necessary service. People need their horses shod and their tools repaired. They can't boycott the only blacksmith for miles around." "They could bring their business to Millerville or San Marcos," Miguel pointed out. "It's only a day's ride, and some of them might think it's worth the extra trouble to avoid dealing with us." As if to prove his point, they heard a wagon pulling up outside. Through the window, Elena could see Thomas Reed, one of their regular customers, loading his broken plow onto his wagon bed. He had obviously come to collect it, then changed his mind. Miguel sighed and shook his head. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." Elena felt a surge of anger at the unfairness of it all. "Papa, we've done nothing wrong. You've served this community faithfully for 20 years. Are they really going to punish you because your daughter refused to marry someone she doesn't love?" "Sometimes, mija, being right isn't enough. People don't like to be reminded that their way of thinking might be wrong. Your refusal of Richard makes them question whether all marriages should be based on practical considerations rather than love. That makes them uncomfortable." Elena picked up a horseshoe and began filing the rough edges, working out her frustration on the metal. "So I should have sacrificed my happiness to make them comfortable?" "No," Miguel said firmly. "You did what you thought was right, and I support you. But we need to think about what comes next. This situation may get worse before it gets better." They worked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Elena was grateful for the familiar rhythm of the work, the solid feel of the tools in her hands, the satisfaction of shaping metal to serve a useful purpose. This was who she was, and she would not apologize for it. Around midday, Elena heard the sound of a horse approaching. She looked out to see a man dismounting from a paint horse, his movements careful and deliberate. She had never seen him before, which was unusual in a town as small as Cedar Falls. Strangers passing through were always noticed and discussed. The man was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were practical, worn jeans, a faded blue shirt, and boots that had seen many miles of hard use. He wore a gun belt, but it was clearly a working tool rather than a display of status. Everything about him suggested a man who lived outdoors and worked with his hands. What struck Elena most about him was his quietness. He moved without hurry or wasted motion, and when he looked around the town, his dark eyes took in everything without seeming to judge what he saw. There was a calmness about him that Elena found oddly reassuring after the hostility she had faced all morning. The stranger tied his horse to the post outside the shop and approached the door. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and went to greet him. "Good afternoon," she said. "How can we help you?" The man touched the brim of his hat politely. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. My horse has thrown a shoe. I was hoping you could replace it. Of course, Elena said. I can take care of that for you right away. She led him toward the corral where they kept horses during shoeing, but the man hesitated. Ma'am, I should mention that I'm a little short on cash right now. Would you consider trading work for the shoeing? I'm handy with tools and not afraid of hard labor. Elena glanced at her father, who had come out of the shop to look at the newcomer. Miguel studied the stranger's face for a moment, then nodded slightly. What kind of work do you do? Elena asked. I'm good with horses and cattle, can mend fences, repair buildings, pretty much anything that needs doing around a ranch or farm. I've got my own tools. There was something honest and straightforward about the way he spoke that Elena trusted immediately. We've got some fence posts that need setting behind the shop, and the roof on our storage shed has been leaking. If you can handle those jobs, we'll call it even for the shoeing. That's more than fair, ma'am, thank you. The man extended his hand. Name's Jake Morrison. Elena shook his hand, noticing the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. Elena Martinez, this is my father, Miguel. Jake nodded respectfully to Miguel, who returned the greeting in Spanish. To Elena's surprise, Jake responded in fluent Spanish, and the two men talked for a few minutes in the language of Elena's childhood. As Elena worked on shoeing Jake's horse, she found herself curious about this quiet stranger. Most men felt the need to fill silence with conversation, to establish their importance, or share their opinions about local matters. Jake seemed content to watch her work and answer her questions with simple, direct responses. You're passing through Cedar Falls? She asked as she fitted the new shoe. Planning to, yes, ma'am, though I might stay a few days if there's work to be had. My horse could use some rest, and I need to earn a little money before moving on. Where are you headed? West, Jake said simply. Always west. Elena found his brevity refreshing after the morning she had endured. Here was a man who did not seem to need to share his entire life story or his opinions about how other people should live their lives. As she worked, Elena became aware that a small crowd was gathering across the street. The morning's events had made her the subject of intense interest, and now the presence of a stranger was adding to the town's curiosity. She could see Mrs. Henderson talking animatedly with several other women, all of them staring in the direction of the blacksmith shop. Jake noticed the attention as well. His eyes flicked toward the group, then back to Elena. Seems like you folks are the popular attraction today. Elena felt her cheeks grow warm. It's a small town. People notice everything. Must make it hard to have any privacy, Jake observed mildly. You have no idea, Elena muttered, then immediately regretted speaking so freely to a stranger. But Jake did not press her for details or gossip. He simply nodded in understanding and changed the subject to ask about the quality of grass in the area for grazing horses. Elena finished the shoeing and Jake inspected her work with the careful attention of someone who knew horses well. He nodded approvingly. Fine work, Miss Martinez. Your horse will travel easy on this. Thank you, Elena said, pleased by the professional compliment. Now, let me show you those fence posts. As they walked behind the shop, Elena pointed out the area where the new fence needed to go. Jake examined the ground, noted the slope and drainage, and asked practical questions about the purpose of the fence and the type of animals it needed to contain. I can get this done this afternoon if you've got the materials, he said. The roof work might take most of tomorrow, depending on how extensive the damage is. Elena showed him the storage shed, and Jake climbed up to examine the roof carefully. It's not too bad, he reported. Needs some new boards and fresh tar, but the structure is sound. Your father built this to last. He builds everything to last, Elena said with pride. He's the best craftsman in 3 counties. Jake nodded seriously. I can see that from looking around here. You both do fine work. Elena felt a warm glow at the compliment. After the morning of hostility and criticism, It was wonderful to be appreciated for her skills rather than judged for her personal choices. They spent the rest of the afternoon working together, Jake setting fence posts while Elena continued with her regular tasks in the shop. She found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice. He worked with the same quiet efficiency he showed in everything else, never hurrying but never wasting motion either. He was obviously experienced at this type of work. As the day wore on, Elena noticed that Jake's presence seemed to calm the atmosphere around the shop. Customers who might have avoided them began stopping by again, curious about the stranger and unwilling to let their disapproval of Elena keep them from satisfying their curiosity. Jake was polite but brief with everyone who spoke to him. He did not encourage gossip or speculation about his past or his plans. When Mrs. Henderson herself finally found an excuse to visit the shop, clearly fishing for information about the newcomer, Jake simply touched his hat and continued working. Elena found this refusal to engage with the town gossips both amusing and refreshing. Jake Morrison was clearly a man who minded his own business and expected others to do the same. As the sun began to set, Jake finished the fence work and cleaned his tools. Elena walked out to inspect what he had done and found that he had not only set the posts exactly where they needed to be, but had also repaired several loose boards on the existing fence without being asked. "You didn't need to do the extra work," she said. Jake shrugged. Saw it needed doing. Didn't take much extra time. Elena looked at this quiet stranger who had spent the day working beside them, asking for nothing more than a fair trade for his horse's shoeing. After the hostility and judgment she had faced that morning, his simple acceptance and professional courtesy felt like a gift. "Would you like to stay for supper?" she asked impulsively. "It's the least we can offer after all the work you've done." Jake hesitated for a moment. "That's kind of you, ma'am, but I don't want to impose." "You wouldn't be imposing," Elena assured him. "Papa always cooks too much food anyway." Jake glanced toward Miguel, who was closing up the shop for the day. The older man looked up and called out in Spanish, echoing Elena's invitation. "Well," Jake said, "if you're sure it's no trouble." As they walked toward the small house behind the blacksmith shop, Elena realized that for the first time since last night's disaster at the Whitman Ranch, she felt like herself again. Jake Morrison's quiet presence had reminded her that there were people in the world who judged others by their character and their work rather than by their willingness to conform to social expectations. She did not know anything about Jake's past or his future plans, but she was grateful that his path had crossed theirs on this particular day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she could enjoy the company of someone who accepted her exactly as she was. The next morning dawned clear and bright, but Elena woke with a knot of worry in her stomach. During supper the night before, Jake Morrison had proven to be an easy guest, helping with the dishes without being asked, and sharing stories about his travels that painted pictures of places Elena had only imagined. He had slept in the barn, refusing Miguel's offer of a bed in the house, saying he was used to sleeping outdoors and did not want to impose further on their kindness. Now, as Elena stepped outside to begin her morning chores, she found Jake already up and examining the damaged roof of the storage shed. He looked up as she approached, touching the brim of his hat in his quiet way. "Morning, Miss Martinez. I've been looking at this roof situation. It's going to need more work than I thought yesterday. Some of the support beams are starting to rot where the water's been getting in." Elena climbed up on a box to see what he was pointing out. Their shoulders nearly touched as she leaned forward to look, and she caught a faint scent of leather and clean soap. Jake shifted slightly to give her more room, but she was very aware of his presence beside her. "How much more work?" she asked, trying to focus on the practical matter at hand. "Maybe 2 days instead of 1. I'll need to replace some boards and reinforce the frame before we can put on new roofing material. But it'll be solid when I'm done." Elena bit her lip thinking about their arrangement. That's much more work than we agreed on for the horseshoeing. Jake shrugged, the same casual gesture she had noticed the day before. Fair is fair. I want to do the job right, not just patch it up so it fails again next year. There was something about his straightforward honesty that made Elena trust him completely. All right, but we'll pay you properly for the extra work. Papa has been meaning to fix that roof for months, and we certainly can't afford to have our tools and supplies getting ruined by rain. We can settle up when the work's done, Jake said. No hurry. As Jake began gathering materials for the roof repair, Elena started her own morning tasks. She was feeding the chickens when she noticed Mrs. Henderson approaching with her usual determined stride. The banker's wife was clearly on a mission, and Elena braced herself for another confrontation. "Elena Martinez," Mrs. Henderson called out while still 20 feet away. "I need to speak with you." Elena straightened up, scattering corn for the chickens, with perhaps more force than necessary. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. What can I do for you?" Mrs. Henderson glanced toward Jake, who was carrying lumber from their supply pile. She lowered her voice, but her words were sharp with disapproval. "I'm here to talk sense into you before you make an even bigger fool of yourself." "I'm not sure what you mean," Elena said calmly, though her heart was beginning to race. "Don't play innocent with me, young lady. The whole town saw you making eyes at that drifter yesterday. Barely 24 hours after humiliating poor Richard Whitman, and here you are batting your eyelashes at some stranger who probably doesn't have 2 coins to rub together." Elena felt her face grow hot. "I was not making eyes at anyone, Mrs. Henderson. Mr. Morrison needed work, and we had work that needed doing. It was a simple business arrangement." "Business arrangement?" Mrs. Henderson snorted. "Is that what you call inviting him to stay for supper? Elena, people are talking. They're saying you've lost your mind completely, first spurning the best catch in the county and now carrying on with some vagrant who rode into town on a broken-down horse." "Mr. Morrison is not a vagrant," Elena said firmly. "He's a skilled worker and a gentleman, and even if he were not, it would be none of the town's business who I choose to associate with." Mrs. Henderson's eyes flashed with anger. "Everything is the town's business when it affects the reputation of our community. The Whitmans are respected people, Elena. They have friends and business partners throughout this part of Texas. When word gets out about how you treated Richard, it reflects badly on all of us." Elena set down the bucket of chicken feed and faced Mrs. Henderson directly. "I treated Richard with honesty and respect. I did not lead him on or make promises I could not keep. I simply told him the truth." "The truth," Mrs. Henderson repeated bitterly. "The truth is that you're a foolish girl who doesn't understand how the world works. You think you can pick and choose from men like selecting apples at the market. But life isn't like that for women like you. Your father is a blacksmith, Elena. You're not wealthy or well-connected. Richard Whitman was offering you a chance to rise above your station, and you threw it away out of pride." Elena felt her temper beginning to rise, but she kept her voice level. "I threw nothing away, Mrs. Henderson. I made a choice based on what I believe is right for my life." "Your life," Mrs. Henderson said with a harsh laugh. "What kind of life do you think you'll have now? You're 22 years old with no prospects. Men don't like women who work like laborers, Elena. You've got calluses on your hands and muscles in your arms like some kind of farm hand. And after the way you embarrassed Richard, no decent man in this county will want anything to do with you." The words hit Elena like physical blows, but she refused to let Mrs. Henderson see her pain. "If that's true, then I suppose I'll have to make my own way in the world." "Make your own way," Mrs. Henderson repeated mockingly. "How exactly do you plan to do that? No one is going to hire a woman to do a man's job, and you've clearly decided that being a wife and mother is beneath you. What's left, Elena? What kind of future are you building for yourself?" Before Elena could answer, a quiet voice spoke from behind her. "Seems to me that Miss Martinez has already proven she can do a man's job better than most men." Both women turned to see Jake Morrison, standing a few feet away, a load of lumber balanced on his shoulder. His expression was calm, but there was something in his dark eyes that made Mrs. Henderson take a step backward. "I beg your pardon," Mrs. Henderson said stiffly. "This is a private conversation." "Didn't sound private from where I was standing," Jake replied mildly. "Sounded like you were trying to tear down someone who's done nothing but work hard and stand up for what she believes in." Mrs. Henderson's face flushed red. "Mr. Morrison, is it? I don't believe anyone asked for your opinion. You're a stranger here, and this is none of your business." Jake set down the lumber and faced Mrs. Henderson directly. When he spoke, his voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath the calm words. "Ma'am, where I come from, it's every decent person's business to speak up when they see someone being bullied. Miss Martinez has treated me with nothing but kindness and respect. Far as I can tell, she's done the same with everyone else in this town. If people don't appreciate that, maybe the problem isn't with her." Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She clearly was not used to being challenged, especially by a man she considered beneath her social station. "Well," she finally sputtered, "I can see that Elena has found someone who shares her disrespectful attitude. Birds of a feather, I suppose." She turned and stalked away, her back rigid with indignation. Elena watched her go, feeling a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "Thank you," she said to Jake, "but you didn't need to do that. Now she'll just spread more gossip about both of us." Jake shrugged and picked up his lumber again. "Some people are going to talk no matter what you do. Might as well give them something worth talking about." Elena found herself smiling for the first time in days. "You have a point there." As Jake went back to work on the roof, Elena reflected on what Mrs. Henderson had said. The harsh words had hurt because they contained grains of truth that Elena had been trying not to think about. She was 22 and unmarried in a world that offered few options for women in her situation. She did work like a man, and her hands showed the evidence of years of hard labor. Most men probably would be put off by her unconventional skills and independent attitude. But watching Jake work on their roof, measuring and cutting with careful precision, Elena found herself thinking that perhaps there were men in the world who would value strength and skill over conventional feminine qualities. Jake had defended her without hesitation, and he had done so not because he wanted something from her, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The morning passed quietly, with Elena working in the shop while Jake repaired the roof. Miguel had ridden out to a nearby ranch to look at a broken wagon, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and the sound of Jake's hammer overhead. Around noon, Elena was surprised to see her friend Maria Gonzalez approaching the shop. Maria was one of the few people in town who had always supported Elena's independent streak, though she had married young herself and now had 3 small children. "Elena," Maria called out, slightly out of breath from hurrying. "I came as soon as I could get away. I wanted to warn you about something." Elena set down the bridle she had been repairing and went to meet her friend. "Warn me about what?" Maria glanced around nervously, making sure they were not being overheard. "There was a meeting this morning at the Whitman house. Richard and his father called together some of the town's leading men. They're saying that your family is a bad influence on the community, that your father has been filling your head with ideas above your station." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of meeting, Maria?" "They're talking about economic pressure," Maria said quietly. "Richard's father has influence with the bank, the general store, most of the businesses in town. They're suggesting that people should take their trade elsewhere, that supporting your family's business is the same as approving of your behavior." Elena sank onto a nearby stool, feeling the weight of this new threat. "They want to ruin Papa's business because I wouldn't marry Richard." "I'm afraid so. And Elena, there's more. They're also spreading rumors about your character, suggesting that you've been meeting secretly with men, that you're not the virtuous woman people thought you were." That's a lie, Elena said angrily. I've never done anything improper. I know that, Maria assured her. And so do most people who really know you. But you know how gossip works in a small town. The truth becomes less important than the story people want to believe. Elena looked up toward the roof where Jake was working. Are they saying things about Mr. Morrison too? Maria nodded reluctantly. They're calling him a fortune hunter, saying he's probably some kind of outlaw running from the law. Richard is particularly angry about his presence here. Elena felt a surge of protective anger on Jake's behalf. Mr. Morrison has done nothing but honest work since he arrived. He's been completely respectful and proper. I believe you, Maria said. But Elena, you need to be careful. The Whitmans are powerful people, and Richard is not used to being told no. This could get much worse before it gets better. After Maria left, Elena sat in the shop trying to process this new information. She had expected some gossip and disapproval, but she had not anticipated an organized effort to destroy her family's livelihood. Miguel was a skilled craftsman who had served the community faithfully for 20 years. It seemed unthinkable that people would abandon him because of their disapproval of her personal choices. But as the afternoon wore on, Elena began to see evidence that Maria's warning was accurate. Several people who had planned to pick up completed work failed to appear. Mrs. Cooper's husband came by to collect a repaired harness but seemed nervous and hurried, avoiding eye contact and leaving quickly without his usual friendly conversation. Most telling was when Thomas Reed returned for the second time that week. This time he actually entered the shop, but when he saw Elena working at the anvil, he hesitated. Is your father here, Elena? He asked uncomfortably. He's out on a call, Mr. Reed. Can I help you with something? Reed shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. Well, it's just that I need some work done on my plow, but maybe I should come back when Miguel is here. Elena set down her hammer and faced him directly. Mr. Reed, I've repaired your equipment before, and you've always been satisfied with my work. What's different now? Reed's face reddened. Elena, it's not about your skills. You do fine work. Everyone knows that. It's just that, well, people are talking, and my wife thinks maybe it would be better if we took our business elsewhere for a while. Because I refused to marry Richard Whitman? Reed looked miserable. Elena, I don't want to get involved in all this. You're a good girl, and what you do with your life is your own business. But Margaret Whitman is my wife's cousin, and family is family, you know? Elena nodded slowly, understanding the impossible position Reed was in. I understand, Mr. Reed. You have to do what you think is best for your family. After Reed left, Elena sat alone in the shop feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. The Whitmans were not just angry about her refusal of Richard's proposal, they were systematically trying to isolate and punish her entire family. The injustice of it made her furious, but she also felt helpless to fight back. She was still sitting there when Jake climbed down from the roof, his work finished for the day. He took one look at her face and set down his tools. What's happened? He asked simply. Elena found herself telling him everything. Maria's warning, Thomas Reed's visit, the organized campaign against her family's business. Jake listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly serious. How much of your business comes from people here in Cedar Falls? He asked when she finished. Most of it, Elena admitted. There are some customers from outlying ranches and farms, but the majority of our work comes from townspeople and nearby neighbors. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring off toward the main street of Cedar Falls. Finally, he spoke. Miss Martinez, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Have you ever thought about leaving here, starting over somewhere else? Elena felt her heart skip a beat at the question. I've thought about it sometimes, but this is my home. Papa's business is here, our house is here. We have roots in this community going back 20 years. Roots can be replanted, Jake said quietly. Sometimes a tree needs new soil to really grow. Are you suggesting we should run away? Jake shook his head. Not run away. Make a choice. There's a difference between fleeing from something and moving toward something better. Elena studied his face, trying to understand what he was really saying. What do you know about starting over, Mr. Morrison? Jake was quiet for so long that Elena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and distant. I know that sometimes staying in a place where people are determined to make you miserable is not brave, it's just stubborn. I know that there are places in this world where a person can be judged by their character instead of their willingness to conform. And I know that skills like yours and your father's are valuable anywhere there are horses and metal that need working. You're talking about leaving everything we've built here. I'm talking about building something better somewhere else, somewhere where your father's 20 years of good work would be respected, and where a woman with your skills would be valued instead of criticized. Elena felt a flutter of something that might have been hope, mixed with fear. And where would that be exactly? Jake looked toward the horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and red. West, always west. There are new towns starting up all along the frontier, places where people are too busy building their own lives to worry about what their neighbors are doing. Places where a skilled blacksmith would be welcomed with open arms, and where a woman who can shoe a horse and repair a wagon would be seen as an asset instead of an oddity. Elena was quiet, thinking about what he had said. The idea of leaving Cedar Falls was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had lived her entire life in this small Texas town, but that life was now being systematically destroyed by people who claimed to be her neighbors and friends. You make it sound simple, she said finally. Simple, but not easy, Jake corrected. It would mean giving up everything familiar, taking a big risk on an uncertain future. But sometimes that's what it takes to really live, instead of just surviving. As if summoned by their conversation, Miguel returned from his call just as the sun was setting. Elena could tell immediately that his day had not gone well. His shoulders were slumped, and his usually cheerful expression was troubled. The Hendersons canceled their order for new horseshoes, he announced without preamble, and the Coopers want to postpone the repair work on their wagon indefinitely. Elena exchanged a meaningful look with Jake. The economic pressure campaign was beginning even sooner than they had expected. Miguel noticed Jake's presence and the completed roof work. Ah, you finished the roof. Excellent work, Mr. Morrison. What do we owe you? We were just discussing that, Jake said. But first, there are some things you need to know about what's been happening in town today. Over supper, Elena and Jake filled Miguel in on the morning's confrontation with Mrs. Henderson, Maria's warning about the meeting at the Whitman house, and the increasing evidence that their business was being targeted for economic reprisal. Miguel listened to it all with growing sadness and anger. 20 years, he said finally. 20 years I have served this community. I shod their horses through droughts and floods. I repaired their equipment when they had no money to pay me. I helped build half the buildings in this town, and this is how they repay that loyalty. Papa, Elena said gently, maybe it's time to think about making a change. Miguel looked at her sharply. What kind of change? Elena glanced at Jake, drawing strength from his calm presence. Maybe it's time to consider starting over somewhere else. Somewhere we could build the business we want without having to constantly defend our right to exist. Miguel was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet with unshed tears. Mija, this place is all I have ever known. Your mother is buried here. Our memories are here. Mama's memory isn't tied to a piece of ground, Papa. It's in our hearts, and we carry it with us wherever we go. As for this place, what kind of memories are we making now? Do you want to spend the rest of your life fighting people who should be our friends and neighbors? Jake cleared his throat softly. Mr. Martinez, if I may say something, I've traveled through a lot of country, seen a lot of towns. What you and your daughter have built here, the skills, the reputation for quality work, the way you treat people with respect, that's portable. You could rebuild in a place where people would appreciate what you have to offer. Miguel looked at Jake with new interest. And where would such a place be? I was heading toward Colorado territory, Jake said. There are new mining towns springing up all through the mountains, and every one of them needs skilled tradesmen. A good blacksmith can write his own ticket in a place like that. And Miss Elena's skills would be particularly valuable in communities where women often have to be self-reliant. Elena felt her heart racing at the thought. Colorado territory seemed like another world, full of possibilities and adventures she had only dreamed about. It would be a big risk, Miguel said slowly. Staying here is a risk too, Elena pointed out. The risk of watching everything you've built slowly destroyed by people who care more about social conformity than fairness or justice. Miguel was quiet again, thinking. Finally, he looked up at both of them. If we were to consider such a move, we would need to plan carefully. We couldn't just pack up and leave tomorrow. Elena's heart leaped. Her father was actually considering the possibility. Jake nodded seriously. Of course, a move like this would need to be planned properly. You'd want to sell what you couldn't take with you, pack up your tools and essential equipment, maybe arrange for some traveling companions for safety on the road. How long would such a journey take? Miguel asked. From here to Colorado? Maybe 6 weeks depending on weather and road conditions. It would be best to wait until spring. Travel during the good weather months. Elena realized that they were talking about this as if it were a real possibility, not just a fantasy. The thought filled her with a mixture of excitement and terror. There's something else to consider, Jake added quietly. If you decide to make this move, you might want to keep your plans private for now. If the Whitmans get wind of it, they might try to make things even more difficult for you. Miguel nodded grimly. Yes, I can see that. Richard's pride has been wounded, and wounded pride can be a dangerous thing. As if his words were prophetic, they heard the sound of multiple horses approaching the shop. Elena looked out the window and felt her heart sink. Richard Whitman was riding toward them with 3 other men, and none of them looked friendly. Jake stood up quickly, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun belt. Mr. Martinez, you and Elena should stay inside. Let me handle this. But Elena was already moving toward the door. No, Mr. Morrison. This is our fight, but thank you for wanting to help. She stepped outside into the yard, with Miguel and Jake flanking her on either side. Richard Whitman dismounted from his horse, his face twisted with anger and what might have been alcohol. The men with him were all sons of prominent local families, young men who had never liked Elena's independent ways and now saw a chance to put her in what they considered her proper place. Elena Martinez, Richard called out, his voice slightly slurred. I've come to give you one last chance to reconsider your foolish decision. Elena straightened her shoulders and met Richard Whitman's angry gaze without flinching. The smell of whiskey on his breath was strong enough to detect from several feet away, and she could see that his companions had been drinking as well. This was not a social visit. Richard, she said calmly, you're on our property, and you've been drinking. I think it would be best if you and your friends left now. Richard laughed harshly. Our property? Elena, do you have any idea how much trouble your family is in right now? My father has been talking to people all over the county. Nobody wants to do business with a blacksmith whose daughter is a disgrace to the community. Miguel stepped forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. Richard, Elena gave you her answer. It was honest and respectful. You need to accept it and move on. Move on? Richard's voice rose. Do you think I can just move on after being humiliated in front of half the county? Elena made me look like a fool, and now she's carrying on with this drifter like some kind of loose woman. Jake's voice cut through the tension like a blade. That's enough. You can take your anger out on me if you want, but you will not speak about Miss Martinez that way. Richard turned his attention to Jake, and Elena could see the hatred burning in his eyes. Oh, the hired hand wants to play hero. Tell me, Morrison, what exactly are your intentions toward Elena? Are you planning to marry her? Or are you just looking for some entertainment before you move on to the next town? Elena felt her face burn with embarrassment and anger, but Jake's voice remained calm and steady. My intentions are honorable, and they're between me and Miss Martinez, but I'll tell you this much. She deserves better than a man who would try to force her into marriage and then punish her when she exercises her right to choose. One of Richard's companions, a young man named Billy Henderson, who was Mrs. Henderson's nephew, spoke up. You're pretty brave with that gun on your hip, stranger, but there are 4 of us and only 1 of you. Jake's expression didn't change, but Elena noticed his stance shift slightly, becoming more balanced and ready. Numbers don't always tell the whole story, he said quietly. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Elena realized that this confrontation could easily turn violent, and she couldn't let that happen. Too many people had already been hurt by her decision to refuse Richard's proposal. That's enough, she said, stepping forward between the 2 groups of men. Richard, you're upset, and I understand that. But threatening people and making accusations isn't going to solve anything. Richard stared at her with eyes that held more pain than anger. Elena, I offered you everything I had. My name, my family's land, financial security for the rest of your life. What more could any woman want? Elena felt a moment of genuine sympathy for him. Richard was not a bad man, just a man who had been raised to believe that what he wanted should naturally be what everyone else wanted too. Richard, she said gently, you offered me everything you thought I should want, but you never asked me what I actually wanted for my life. You never tried to understand who I really am or what makes me happy. I wanted to make you happy, Richard insisted. I would have given you anything you asked for, except the one thing I needed most, the freedom to be myself. You wanted to marry the woman you thought I should be, not the woman I actually am. Richard was quiet for a moment, and Elena thought she might be getting through to him, but then his eyes hardened again, and she realized that alcohol and wounded pride were stronger than reason. Well, let's see how happy you are when your father's business is ruined, he said bitterly. Let's see how free you feel when nobody in 3 counties will associate with your family. You think you're too good for me, Elena? You're about to find out exactly what your pride is worth. Miguel had heard enough. That's enough, Richard. You need to leave now, before this goes any further. Or what, old man? You'll throw me off your property? You and whose army? Jake took a step forward. Mr. Martinez doesn't need an army. He has me. The 2 groups of men faced each other across the yard, and Elena could see that violence was only moments away. She had to do something to defuse the situation before someone got seriously hurt. Wait, she called out, moving to stand in the center of the yard. Richard, if this is really about your wounded pride, then let's settle it properly. You say I've disrespected you and your family. I say you're acting like a spoiled child who's never been told no before. So let's put it to a test. Everyone stared at her, surprised by her sudden proposal. Richard frowned. What kind of test? Elena's mind was racing, trying to think of a way to end this confrontation that would satisfy everyone's honor without bloodshed. Suddenly, she had an idea. You say I'm not worth the trouble I've caused you, that I'm just a blacksmith's daughter who doesn't know her place. But I say my skills and my work speak for themselves, so let's let them settle this argument. Elena, Miguel said nervously. "What are you thinking?" Elena looked at Richard steadily. "A contest. Your best man with a hammer against me. We'll each shoe a horse, and the town can judge whose work is better. If your man wins, I'll publicly apologize for embarrassing you, and I'll never again claim to be the equal of any man in this county. But if I win, you and your family stop this campaign against our business and accept that I have the right to make my own choices in life." Richard looked intrigued despite himself. "And what makes you think I'd agree to such a contest?" "Because you're so sure I can't match a man's work that you see it as an easy way to put me in my place once and for all. And because deep down you're not really a bad man, Richard. You're just confused about what honor actually means." Richard conferred quietly with his companions for a few minutes. Elena could see them arguing, with Billy Henderson clearly advocating for a more direct confrontation. But Richard was sobering up slightly, and he seemed to realize that Elena's proposal offered him a way to save face while avoiding actual violence. "All right," he said finally. "Tomorrow morning, in the town square, where everyone can see. I'll bring Tom Harrison. He's been blacksmithing for 15 years and can outwork any man in the county. When you lose, Elena, you'll admit publicly that you were wrong to refuse my proposal and that women have no business doing men's work." Elena felt her heart racing, but she kept her voice steady. "And when I win, you'll admit publicly that my refusal was based on legitimate differences, not disrespect, and that I have the right to live my life according to my own judgment." "Deal," Richard said, extending his hand. Elena shook it firmly, sealing the agreement. As Richard and his men rode away, she realized what she had just committed herself to. Tom Harrison was indeed an excellent blacksmith, with years more experience than she had. Tomorrow, in front of the entire town, she would have to prove that her skills were equal to his, or face public humiliation and the ruin of her family's reputation. Jake waited until the riders were out of earshot before speaking. "Miss Martinez, are you sure about this? You're betting everything on one contest." Elena nodded, though she felt far from certain. "It was the only way I could think of to end this without bloodshed. And Jake, if I can't prove my worth through my work, then maybe I don't deserve the independence I've been fighting for." Miguel put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Mija, you have nothing to prove to anyone. Your skill with hammer and anvil is already well known." "But not acknowledged," Elena pointed out. "People know I can do the work, but they've never had to admit that I can do it as well as a man. Tomorrow, they won't have any choice but to judge my work honestly." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What do you need to prepare for this contest?" Elena appreciated that he didn't try to talk her out of it or suggest that the whole idea was too dangerous. "I need to select the right tools, practice my technique, and get a good night's sleep. The actual shoeing is just a matter of doing what I've done thousands of times before." "Then let's make sure you have every advantage possible," Jake said practically. "Mr. Martinez, what can we do to help Elena prepare?" Miguel thought for a moment. "The horse will make a difference. Some horses are easier to shoe than others." "Elena, do you know who will be providing the horses for this contest?" Elena realized she hadn't thought of that detail. "No, we didn't discuss it. I suppose Richard will choose them, which means he'll probably pick animals that are difficult to work with." Jake shook his head. "That wouldn't be fair, and everyone would know it. For this contest to really settle anything, it has to be obviously fair to all observers. I think you should insist on neutral horses, maybe ones provided by someone who isn't involved in this dispute." They spent the rest of the evening planning for the contest, discussing strategy and technique. Jake proved to have a surprising knowledge of blacksmithing, offering insights that suggested he had spent considerable time around forges and anvils. "Where did you learn so much about metalwork?" Elena asked as they worked together to prepare her tools. Jake was quiet for a moment. "My father was a blacksmith back in Missouri. Taught me the basics before I decided to try my hand at other things. I was never as good as he was, and nowhere near as good as you are, but I know enough to recognize quality work when I see it." Elena felt a warm glow at the compliment. "What happened to your father?" "Died during the war," Jake said simply. "Confederate raiders burned down his shop with him inside. That's when I decided there wasn't much left for me in Missouri." Elena felt a pang of sympathy for Jake's loss. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrible." "It was a long time ago," Jake said, but Elena could hear the old pain in his voice. "But it taught me that sometimes you have to leave everything behind and start over somewhere new. Sometimes that's the only way to build the life you really want." They worked together in comfortable silence after that, preparing Elena's tools and discussing the technical aspects of competitive horseshoeing. Elena found herself thinking about Jake's words about starting over. Tomorrow's contest would determine whether she could stay in Cedar Falls with her head held high or whether she would have to leave in defeat. But either way, she was beginning to think that leaving might not be the worst outcome. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with a sharp wind that carried the promise of winter. Elena woke early and spent extra time preparing herself, braiding her hair securely and choosing her sturdiest work clothes. She wanted to look professional and capable, not like some woman playing at a man's job. By the time she and Miguel arrived in the town square, a crowd had already gathered. It seemed like everyone in Cedar Falls had come to witness the contest, along with people from the surrounding ranches and farms. Elena had expected interest, but the size of the crowd was overwhelming. A makeshift arena had been set up in the center of the square, with 2 forges, anvils, and complete sets of blacksmithing tools. The townspeople had clearly put considerable effort into making this a proper contest. Elena felt both grateful for their fairness and nervous about performing in front of so many people. Tom Harrison was already there, examining his tools and talking with Richard Whitman. Harrison was a big man in his 40s, with massive shoulders and arms like tree trunks. He had been blacksmithing since before Elena was born, and his reputation for quality work was well established. Elena tried not to let Harrison's obvious physical advantages intimidate her. She knew that blacksmithing was as much about technique and precision as it was about brute strength, and she had spent years developing both. Richard Whitman stepped forward to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, you all know why we're here. Miss Elena Martinez has claimed that she can do any work a man can do, and has used that claim to justify behavior that many of us find inappropriate for a woman. Today she'll have a chance to prove whether her boasts are justified." Elena bristled at the word boasts, but she kept her expression calm. She had agreed to this contest, and she would see it through. Jake appeared at her elbow, speaking quietly so only she could hear. "Remember, you're not just proving something to them. You're proving it to yourself. Show them what Elena Martinez can do." Elena nodded, drawing strength from his confidence in her. She stepped forward to address the crowd herself. "People of Cedar Falls, I want to be clear about what this contest means. I'm not trying to prove that I'm better than any man. I'm simply trying to prove that I have the right to use my skills to earn my living and live my life according to my own judgment. If Tom Harrison outworks me today, I'll accept the judgment gracefully. But I ask that if I prove equal to the task, you accept that a woman can be as capable as a man in the right circumstances." There were murmurs from the crowd, some approving and some disapproving. Elena could see Mrs. Henderson in the front row, her face set in lines of disapproval. But she could also see Maria Gonzalez giving her an encouraging smile, and several of the working men in the crowd looked curious to see what would happen. The mayor, John Davidson, stepped forward to serve as the official judge. "The rules are simple. Each contestant will shoe one horse, start to finish. They must remove the old shoes, trim and clean the hooves, shape new shoes to fit, and attach them properly. The horses have been selected randomly from animals brought in by neutral parties, and each contestant will choose their horse by drawing lots. Elena and Harrison each drew a slip of paper from a hat. Elena opened hers to find she had drawn a large bay gelding that looked calm but alert. Harrison had drawn a smaller mare that seemed more nervous. Elena felt a moment of guilt. She had gotten what appeared to be the easier horse. But as she approached the bay gelding to examine him, Elena realized that appearances could be deceiving. The horse was calm, but he was also massive, with hooves the size of dinner plates. Shoeing him would require considerable strength to handle his weight and large shoes. Harrison's mare might be nervous, but she was smaller and would require less physical effort. Elena spent a few minutes examining her horse's feet, checking for any problems that might affect the work. The bay stood quietly for her inspection, and she felt a moment of gratitude for his good temperament. When the mayor called for the contest to begin, Elena fell into the familiar rhythm of her craft. She had shod hundreds of horses, and muscle memory took over as she removed the old shoes and began cleaning and trimming the hooves. Around her, the crowd watched in fascination. Many of them had seen Elena work before, but never in direct competition with an experienced man. Elena could hear the whispered comments as she worked, some surprised by her strength and efficiency, others still skeptical of her abilities. Harrison was working steadily at his own horse, and Elena could see that he was indeed skilled. His movements were economical and precise, and his mare stood quietly for him despite her initial nervousness. This was going to be a real contest, not an easy victory for either participant. Elena moved to the forge to begin heating the iron for new shoes. This was where her experience and training would really matter. Shaping horseshoes required an understanding of both the metal and the horse, knowing exactly how much heat to apply and how to form the iron to fit perfectly. As she worked the glowing metal with hammer and tongs, Elena felt the familiar satisfaction of doing work she was truly good at. The iron responded to her touch like a living thing, bending and shaping according to her will. She was dimly aware of the crowd watching, but most of her attention was focused on the work itself. The first shoe was ready, and Elena returned to the bay gelding to fit it. The horse stood patiently as she held the hot iron against his hoof to check the fit, adjusting the shape with careful hammer blows until it was perfect. Elena glanced over at Harrison and saw that he was slightly ahead of her, already fitting his second shoe. But Elena was not worried. She had always been more concerned with doing work correctly than with doing it quickly, and she could see that her first shoe was perfectly fitted and securely attached. She moved on to the second hoof, working with steady concentration. The crowd had grown quieter as they watched, apparently absorbed in the skill and craftsmanship both contestants were displaying. As Elena shaped the second shoe, she became aware of a change in the atmosphere. The hostile murmurs had faded, replaced by what sounded like genuine appreciation for the quality of work being performed. Even people who disapproved of her independence seemed impressed by her obvious skill. Elena finished attaching the second shoe and moved on to the third. She was now slightly behind Harrison, but her work was clean and precise. Each shoe fit perfectly, and the bay gelding stood calmly throughout the process, clearly comfortable with her handling. The third and fourth shoes went on smoothly, and Elena found herself finishing just moments after Harrison. Both horses stood quietly, newly shod and ready for work. Mayor Davidson examined both horses carefully, checking the fit and attachment of each shoe. The crowd waited in tense silence for his judgment. Finally, the mayor stepped back and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have to say that I've rarely seen finer work from either contestant. Tom Harrison's shoeing is excellent. Every shoe is properly fitted and securely attached. But Elena Martinez's work is equally excellent. In fact, if I had to choose, I'd say her shoes are fitted slightly more precisely to her horse's individual hooves." The crowd erupted in surprised murmurs. Elena felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. She had done it. She had proven that her skills were equal to those of an experienced man. Richard Whitman's face was red with anger and embarrassment, but he stepped forward as agreed. The contest was fair, and the judgment is clear. Elena Martinez has proven that she can do quality work equal to any man in this county. There was scattered applause from the crowd, and Elena saw several people nodding approvingly. Even Mrs. Henderson looked grudgingly impressed, though she still didn't look happy about the outcome. Tom Harrison approached Elena with a genuine smile, extending his hand. "Miss Martinez, that was fine work. Your father taught you well, and you've clearly practiced hard to develop your skills. I'm proud to have competed against a craftswoman of your ability." Elena shook his hand gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. You pushed me to do my best work." As the crowd began to disperse, Elena felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Jake smiling at her with obvious pride. "I knew you could do it," he said quietly. "You showed them something they needed to see." Elena felt a warm glow of accomplishment, but she also realized that winning the contest had not solved all her problems. Richard and his family would honor the agreement not to actively campaign against her business, but that didn't mean the underlying tensions in the community had been resolved. Over the next few days, Elena discovered that she was right. While people treated her with a new respect for her skills, many still disapproved of her independence and unconventional ways. The contest had proven her abilities, but it had not changed fundamental attitudes about women's roles in society. Moreover, Elena found herself thinking more and more about Jake's suggestion of moving west. The contest had been a victory, but it had also shown her the limits of what she could accomplish in Cedar Falls. She would always be fighting the same battles, always having to prove herself over and over again. Jake had stayed on after the contest, saying he wanted to make sure the storage shed roof was completely weatherproofed before the winter rains began, but Elena suspected he was really staying to see what she would decide about her future. One evening, as they worked together in the shop, Elena finally voiced what she had been thinking. "Jake, tell me more about Colorado Territory. What would it really be like for a woman with my skills in one of those mining towns?" Jake set down the bridle he had been repairing and looked at her seriously. "It would be hard work, Elena. Frontier life isn't easy, especially for women. But in a place where everyone is starting over, where survival depends on everyone contributing their skills, a woman who can shoe horses and repair equipment would be seen as an asset, not an oddity." "And what about Papa? He's 60 years old. Is it fair to ask him to start over at his age?" "That's something you and he would have to decide together." "But Elena, I've watched your father these past few weeks. He's not happy here anymore. The community he served faithfully for 20 years has turned against him because of politics and social pressure. That's got to be eating at him." Elena knew Jake was right. Miguel had been quieter than usual since the contest, and she could see the hurt in his eyes when longtime customers continued to avoid the shop. "What about you?" Elena asked quietly. "Are you really just passing through, or are you thinking about settling down somewhere?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, I've been drifting for a long time, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But these past few weeks working with you and your father, I've remembered what it feels like to be part of something bigger than just my own survival." Elena's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you and your father decided to head west, I'd be honored to travel with you. I know the country, I can help with the practical aspects of the journey, and I promise you'd have my protection and support every mile of the way." Elena felt a flutter of something that was part excitement and part terror. "And after we reached Colorado Territory? What then?" Jake stepped closer to her, his dark eyes serious. "Elena, I can't promise you an easy life or conventional happiness. I'm not wealthy. I don't have land or a big house to offer you. but I can promise that I'll treat you as an equal partner, that I'll respect your skills and your independence, and that I'll love you exactly as you are, not as I think you should be." Elena felt tears stinging her eyes. This was what she had been hoping for without daring to admit it to herself. A man who valued her strength instead of trying to diminish it, who saw her independence as an asset rather than a threat. "Jake Morrison," she said softly, "are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider building a life with me, wherever that life might take us. If that means marriage, then yes, I'm asking. But I'm also asking if you'd be willing to take a chance on something completely new and uncertain." Elena looked around the shop that had been her second home for 22 years. It was filled with the tools and memories of her father's craftsmanship, the accumulated work of decades. Leaving it would mean abandoning everything familiar and secure. But as she looked at Jake, Elena realized that security was an illusion anyway. The past few weeks had shown her that even 20 years of faithful service could be wiped away by social disapproval and political pressure. True security came from believing in yourself and choosing people who believed in you too. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. Yes to Colorado territory. Yes to building something new. And yes to marrying you if you'll have me." Jake's face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious expression. He stepped forward and took her hands in his, and Elena marveled at how right it felt to stand there with him, planning a future that was uncertain but full of possibility. "There's one more thing," Jake said. "I want you to know that this decision doesn't have to be permanent. If we get to Colorado and you decide you want to come back to Texas or go somewhere else entirely, we'll figure it out together." Elena felt a surge of love for this man who understood that freedom meant keeping options open, not closing them off. "And Papa? How do we approach him with this idea?" "Together," Jake said. "We present it as a family decision, because that's what it is. I'm not just asking to marry you, Elena. I'm asking to become part of your family and to help build something new for all of us." That night, Elena lay awake thinking about the conversation. Tomorrow, she and Jake would talk to Miguel about the possibility of leaving Cedar Falls and starting over in Colorado territory. It would mean leaving behind everything familiar and venturing into unknown country with a man she had known for less than a month. But as Elena thought about Jake's quiet strength, his respect for her skills, and his willingness to accept her exactly as she was, she felt more certain than she had about anything in her life. She had spent 22 years in Cedar Falls, trying to find a way to be herself in a community that wanted her to be someone else. Now she had a chance to build a new life in a place where being herself would be an advantage rather than a liability. The next morning, Elena and Jake sat down with Miguel over breakfast and shared their plans. Elena watched her father's face carefully as they explained their reasoning for considering a move west. Miguel was quiet for a long time after they finished speaking. Finally, he looked up with tears in his eyes. "Mija, when your mother died, I thought about leaving Cedar Falls, starting over somewhere where every street corner didn't remind me of her. But you were only 10 years old, and this was the only home you had ever known. So I stayed, and I tried to build a life here for both of us." Elena felt her own eyes filling with tears. "Papa, you gave me everything I needed to become who I am today. The skills, the confidence, the example of what it means to work hard and treat people with respect." Miguel smiled sadly. "But I couldn't give you a community that truly accepted you for who you are. Maybe it's time to find one that will." Elena reached across the table and took her father's weathered hand. "Does that mean you'll consider it? The move to Colorado?" Miguel looked at Jake seriously. "Young man, if I entrust my daughter's happiness to you, what guarantee do I have that you'll treasure her as she deserves?" Jake met his gaze directly. "Mr. Martinez, The only guarantee I can give you is that Elena's happiness will be the most important thing in my life. I can't promise that life won't be hard sometimes, but I can promise that we'll face whatever comes together as equal partners." Miguel studied Jake's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then yes, mija. Let's go to Colorado territory. Let's build something new." 3 months later, on a warm spring morning, Elena Martinez Morrison stood beside her husband and father as their wagon rolled toward the Rocky Mountains. Behind them, Cedar Falls was just a memory. Ahead of them lay the Colorado mining town of Silver Creek, where a telegram had assured them that a skilled blacksmith and his family would be welcomed with open arms. Elena wore a simple wedding dress that she had sewn herself, and a gold band that Jake had crafted in her father's forge. Their wedding had been a quiet ceremony, performed by a traveling preacher, with Maria Gonzalez and her family as the only witnesses from Cedar Falls. The sale of the blacksmith shop had provided enough money for travel expenses and new equipment in Colorado. More importantly, it had provided closure to their life in Texas. Elena felt no regret about leaving the town where she had been born. She was moving toward something better, not running away from something bad. As their wagon crested a hill and Elena got her first glimpse of the snow-capped peaks in the distance, she felt Jake's hand squeeze hers. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Elena looked at her husband, then at her father driving the wagon with renewed purpose in his eyes, then at the vast open country spreading out before them. Somewhere out there was a life where she could be herself completely, where her skills would be valued, and where she and Jake could build something lasting together. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Only possibilities." The wagon rolled on toward the mountains, carrying the Martinez family toward a future that was uncertain, but full of hope. Behind them, the dust settled on the road they had traveled. Ahead of them, adventure waited in the wide open spaces of the American West. Elena had spurned a marriage that would have made her safe, but unhappy, and in return, she had found a love that promised to make her both free and fulfilled. The silent cowboy who had defended her in the town square had indeed led her beyond the narrow confines of Cedar Falls, toward a horizon that stretched as far as her dreams could reach. As the sun climbed higher and the mountains grew larger on the horizon, Elena Martinez Morrison smiled and settled back for the long journey to her new life. She had chosen her own path, and she had chosen well.